Okay, if I'd like to invite my panelists to join me and take a seat, that would be fantastic. I will introduce you, but I've got a couple of slides to set the scene. So please, round of applause for the panelists. So our panel is Aviation is Back. We're going to start with that as being a bit of a positive, but we also need to be aware of some of the things that are happening that could affect this recovery. Not least, obviously, what's happened today with my wonderful country with the UK and the pound and what's happened there and the inflation that we're seeing across Europe and across the world. So I wanted to start by showing you some statistics from Forward Keys, a travel data company that we do quite a bit of work with, that I know have presented at bench events in the past as well. And what it's showing is this particular slide shows the recovery versus July and August in 2022 versus 2019. And what you can see is that the green areas are very much in southeastern Europe, which is great. Obviously, we saw this with Thomas's from STR, his presentation earlier, that Turkey really is really performing very strongly. But as you can see, Greece is right up there as well and very, very much a green destination. So I think this recovery is more than a lot of us expected, and it's definitely more than most of us predicted we could, or hoped that we could potentially cope with from an operational standpoint as well. So it's a really, really strong picture for what happened in the summer, despite all those human capital issues. The second slide just gives you an idea of how the cities are performing as well. And obviously, this again is great news for Athens, being only 7% down versus 2019. Again, as we say, Turkey is performing. But as you can see, the southern Eastern Europe side of things is recovering. So that's the good news. And as I said, they could have been even better news. I think some of our panel here have had some very good summers as well, and we'll hear about that very shortly. But our role today is to look at the headwinds. What's coming? And what are those potential issues, and what is the impact potentially on our wonderful industry, both tourism and aviation, hospitality? They're so interconnected, and Andreas, who sat next to me, is somebody who's written many books on the subject, and the guys are very, very, very much in the know. So to explore this topic, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by my three panelists. So we have Vasiliki Christidi here in the middle, who is the Group General Manager for Sky Express, who I'm sure all of the people based here in Greece know very, very well. Vasiliki is a lawyer by trade, and she brings experience across many, many industries to the aviation industry and has been with Sky Express since 2015, and we'll find out a little bit more about Sky Express shortly. We have Professor Andreas Papatheodorou as well, who is currently a professor in industrial and spatial economics with an emphasis on tourism at the University of the Aegean. Professor Andreas holds appointments across the board with numerous overseas universities. We'd be here and our time would run out, I think, if I went through them all. But also he is the president of the Hellenic Aviation Society and a member of the executive board of the Hellenic Civil Aviation Authority. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ayca Kolukisa, who is the chief strategy officer of the new airport of Heraklion, which is the second largest airport in Greece. She's got 20 years of aviation experience. She's worked on greenfield sites and brownfield sites as well. And I just want to say a big thank you to Marina for bringing aviation into these forums. That was my role when I was brought into the bench, and I think that there's an inextricable link between what's happening in aviation, what's happening in hospitality, and that's why we've put this panel on for you today. So, onto the panel, and I'd like to start with you, Andreas, because one of the biggest things that is coming right now is some new legislation from the European Union. They've got a very ambitious target to reduce emissions, and as part of that, they want to levy various taxes on the industry as well. So can you outline those for us in layman's terms and explain roughly what the impact could be?
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful event. Well, we keep saying that demand for transport is of derived nature. Very few people fly for the sake of flying. Most people fly to go somewhere and do something. So selling the destination is of utmost importance. Having the right hospitality facilities is important. But again, we should remember that the airport is the first and the last impression you get from a destination, and obviously you need to get there. So the role of airlines is extremely important. Therefore, we also need to consider the cost of transport, and having said that, we need to take into consideration all the new legislation introduced by the EU, especially with respect to the environment. So at present, there are three key areas that we need to consider. First, it's about the kerosene tax. Until now, air transport has been exempted from kerosene tax. This is going to change, and obviously it will pose a significant burden on the financial ability of airlines. From 2024 onwards, airlines are going to have to pay a kerosene tax. On top of that, we need to consider the so-called SAF, which stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel or Synthetic Aviation Fuel. Airlines will need to use at least a portion of the fuel coming from the SAF, and we have to say that it's quite expensive. It might be 4 or 5 times more expensive than regular fuel, Jet A1. And of course, we have the EU ETS, that's emissions trading scheme. It's been around for some time, but free allowances, many airlines used to have free allowances. These are going to be abolished from 2027 onwards. Carbon prices go up as well. So if we consider that, it's also a problem. And the big issue, the big concern, in my opinion, is that all these taxes add layers and they come cumulatively, and they can provide a big they can constitute a big issue for airlines, especially because certain lines and certain destinations are put at a disadvantage. So if we talk about kerosene tax, this is imposed on intra-EU flights. Same with EU ETS regarding SAF, that's for flights departing from EU airports, which essentially means that EU destinations and EU airlines may be put at a disadvantage compared to non-EU destinations and non-EU flights.
Yeah, and as you can see on the slide here, it illustrates just that impact. So obviously, what we'll discuss shortly is, what happens to that extra cost? Who's going to absorb that extra cost? And will it be to the benefit of those countries outside of these regulations? But before we do that, Ayca, I want to come to you. Tell us about how these regulations, you're building a new airport in Heraklion, which is really exciting, but how are the new regulations impacting your strategy? And tell us a little bit about this exciting new development.
Thank you, John. First, let me introduce our airport to the audience. We are constructing a new airport in Crete Island, which is planned to be operational in 2025. There will be 90,000 square meters of terminal, in which there will be 13,000 square meters of commercial area, retail area, and 4,000 square meters of food and beverage area. In front of our terminal, there will be 700,000 square meters of commercial area that we call airport city, that there will be hotels, residential zones, retail parks, theme parks, and so on. Since this project, the huge project, is contracted in 2016, we have faced pandemic and energy crisis. And not only this, and these two, let's say, force majeure, not only resulted on delays, but also in long term, in all overall concession period due to high investment cost and increased price of materials, infrastructure materials. And additional to this, there are also in a schedule, which they were not in our life yesterday, but now today in our agenda, new regulations like European entry-exit systems, biometrics, Brexit, which they have impact on our design. So what I'm trying to say is, there are crises, there are always regulations, but the issue is how we adapt those changes. I consider aviation as like an ecosystem. These ecosystems have many members, and they are all connected to each other. This summer, we saw that when employee problem rise in ground handlers, it hit also the airlines, airports, even the tourism. So each member of this ecosystem have to have their own solutions, precautions, when there is this kind of unexpected or planned changes. What we do as an airport, luckily we are in a design phase, and what we are doing is operationally, for instance, we are designing an apron where power in, power out stands, that aircrafts, they don't need pushback. Or we are designing stands, walk-in, walk-through, that passengers does not need cobas and passenger boarding bridges. Additional to this, of course, we care about environment and we have responsibility. So this is why we are targeting to be an airport with zero emission, net zero emission and net zero energy airport. We will be a terminal with LEED certificate, and we are investing on solar panels and recyclable water and the treatment of water to be able to use less from the island sources. But as I told, these are the things as an airport that we can do by ourselves, and they are limited. And each these partners or members of this ecosystem doing their tiny things, but I believe main strategy has to come through government or EU level that I believe we will discuss further in detail.
Yeah, I think very interesting there. You're talking about the airport infrastructure. So the question is, you're doing those things from a sustainability perspective. Are you doing them as a prerequisite because that's what the investors expect and it's a condition of their investment? Or are you doing it because it's the right thing to do? Or are you doing it because if you don't, there could be EU penalization? You know, why are you doing it?
Okay. First of all, as an airport, and both, the answer is, first of all, as an airport, I have a responsibility to attract also airline and decrease the cost. At the end, I present the airport fee to the airlines, and I have tenants. So if I minimize my cost and infrastructure cost, at the end, as a return, I will be able to serve more airlines in a more cost-efficient environment. Also, other part, environment part, it is my role as a EU airport to be responsible for the sustainability and the environment. So it is both, I can say.
Great. So it's a long-term play,
Yes.
which is great. But the reason I've left this slide up, Vasiliki, coming to you is, how worried are you about this, and who's going to pay for it? Because ultimately, you know, airlines cut all the costs they could cut during COVID. Some would say cut too many, etc. I think you had a particularly good time as well, and the airline actually grew quite significantly, as we'll find out in a second. But how are you going to deal with something like this? You know, because it's going to impact the fare you're going to have to charge the passenger.
Now that we're in the phase of the three-party dialogue in the Fit for 55 agenda in the European Union, you will hear every European-based airline shouting, "This is carbon leakage. It is proof European connectivity is going to evaporate. Flights are going to move to other destinations. European airlines are going to be impacted." The Commission says, no, I have a plan. It's called, I will put in place a carbon border adjustment mechanism for you, and I will make SAF now in the dialogue, which was not some weeks ago. I will try to put a sustainability aviation fund so that I can fund this price differential on the 2% SAF that you are obliged to uptake as a European airline for intra-EU flights, and then I will rely on Corsia for the other flights, plus the carbon mechanism. So what is this shouting to everyone? Flights are going to become very expensive. Yeah. CO2 is very expensive. We pay, as Sky Express, we have the disadvantage of not being awarded free allowances of CO2. We pay for every single ton of CO2 that we emit because we grew later than 2010. So we don't get grandfather rights for that. CO2 cost increased from COVID from 20 euro per ton to 100 euro per ton today. This is a cost that is put on top of the fuel, traditional Jet A fuel, that increased, everyone knows how much, during these years after the Ukraine crisis war that erupted. 25% of the cost of the operations of every airline is the fuel. So on top of the fuel prices that are increasing, on top of the CO2 that every European airline, forget the free allowances for everyone from 2027 onwards, plus the obligation to uplift 2% SAF, which is 3 up to 6 times more expensive than traditional fuel, plus the new tax to be imposed as the lifting of the exemption, which is going to be about 33 cents per liter on the cost. This means that the cost for airlines will explode. The answer is, can we absorb it? No, not in a million years. It is impossible to absorb all that cost, because it is a fuel increase that most of the airlines have absorbed for this summer season. Then you have heard from the lips of the low-cost carriers, tickets of the value of €50 is a thing of the past, they say. You will not see these fares for any time soon. And the Commission says that in the long term, there will be an effect of people flying less because the cost will be higher, thus the CO2 will become less because we don't carry that much of the weight, and because flights will start being cancelled on some routes. Then comes the differentiation. Who will fly, where, which destination, for what reason, for what frequencies? Because the airlines, as much as the airports and the ground handlers, are at the end of the tourist industry. We are the gatekeepers. We go, we open the door, we let people in to fill in the hotels, the restaurants, the cafes, the destination to be developed. So Europe will effectively be losing connectivity in the short run. So what are we doing in Greece? Being at the edge of Europe in the southeast part, and having the less amount of connectivity, Sky Express grew a plan to grow on ourselves organically, as other airlines will be moving out because of their cost-conscious models. There will be a lag of seats and availability of capacity into the region, so thus came our investment. Investment into what? New aircrafts. Why? Because this is the only thing that can save you fuel and can save you the cost of CO2. So in COVID, we invested an entire to refleet our entire fleet on brand new aircrafts, because this is the only way that we can save per aircraft per year 2,000 tons of CO2. And this is the only way to become efficient. There will be, until 2050, no other technology available for people to fly. We are, by the way, in our small aircrafts that are the 42-500 ATRs that approach the very small and narrow runways in the islands, exploring the prospect of retrofitting them to intake hydrogen as a fuel, as they are, because the technology to put hydrogen-powered aircrafts is not there and they are not tested. And until they are, and they are tested as safe, they will never fly with people in them. Okay? So the only thing that the aviation in Europe can do is completely buy new aircrafts. So where is this investment going to come from? If we are not having enough money to pay for the fuel, for the CO2, paid by the consumers, for the tax on the fuel, for the wage increases, because the industry is suffering on its social capital as well. It is estimated currently at DG Move that the industry of aviation, totally market, has lost 25% permanently of its workforce. You cannot build new pilots overnight. You cannot find ground handling staff overnight, and you will definitely not be finding your luggage if we cannot find ground staff to train. You felt what it's like to be missing human capital in the industry if you flew this summer from a big airport. You departed from your baggage, most of people, forever. Now, aircrafts, new aircrafts is the only thing. So what is the aviation industry saying? Let us use some of the money that we are currently paying into the ETS, the European Trading Scheme, to be used again into the industry, because the aviation industry is paying for its CO2, even with the free allowances, for many years. So what we are saying is, give us the opportunity to use a portion of that money, not for the RRFs, not for your hotels, not for other sustainability projects, but for the aviation industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't got ages, and I want to get to how do we deal with where we're at. And I think that one task I would ask you all to do is have a look at your next ticket that you buy and look at all the taxes that are levied and what actually goes to the airline. It's a very small proportion for them to operate. It's not a great business always to, Richard Branson said, if you want to become a millionaire, start with $1 billion and start an airline, right? So, it is a very difficult industry to make it work. You've done a great job with Sky Express connecting Greece. But we want to talk about what is the impact here, Andreas. So this, if it comes in, distorting competition and driving tourists who are going to be more price sensitive than ever, potentially, due to the economic inflationary headwinds. Are we going to see an exodus to Turkey, to Tunisia, to the markets even further afield that aren't going to do this? And how do we mitigate the impact?
Absolutely, that's a very important issue. And 15 years ago we had a new term coined, which was staycation. People couldn't afford to go outside their own country. They had holidays within France, within Germany, within the UK. Because of COVID, staycation became a term of importance once again. But as we may appreciate now, we're moving out of COVID, and we need people to come from the UK or Germany to Greece or Spain or Portugal. They can definitely go to non-EU countries as well. But we need to consider all this cost disadvantage that airlines suffer, and subsequently consumers are going to suffer. As we can see here, for a single person, the extra burden to fly to Heraklion vis-à-vis Antalya would be 90 euros. If you are a family of 4, that would be 360 euros. Obviously, it does depend on the profile of the destination, on the profile of a customer as well. If you are a customer paying 1,000 euros in a very posh hotel, family, boutique hotel in Santorini, then paying an extra 80 or 90 euros is not a big issue for you. But if we're talking about mass tourist development, even you all know there are 5-star hotels providing an upmarket all-inclusive product, but still people will be somehow price conscious, and obviously that would be an issue. So I think that raises the issue of how the destination should collaborate with the airline to jointly put pressure on the EU to take all these things into consideration, especially for islands. This is an added issue. If you live in Paris and you're going to go down to Marseille or Tunis, you can take a high-speed train. You can't do that to go to Heraklion. And traveling by air is the only option for you. So we need to consider always what we call geographical discontinuity, the very fact that Greece or Croatia or Italy or Spain, we have islands. The only way to reach those islands is by air. So air should not be penalized. Airlines, airports should not be demonized. So working together, having all the different stakeholders coming together to do that is important. From an investor's point of view, again, the investment community should help destinations. Raising the profile of destinations, raising the profile of hotels might also help to get less price-sensitive customers who might be less inclined to be impacted by this huge price difference.
But there's only so many of those. We all want the high-yielding, super luxury tourists. There's only so many, and obviously the Greek islands have done very well over the years with that sort of middle-level traveller. So Ayca, I want to put it to you directly in terms of, with Heraklion, with this issue, if you were to reach out, you've already said, look, the airport's very important, but ultimately the best airport experience is the one that you get through the quickest to get to the destination. And this burden shouldn't sit with the airport. It's not fair. People aren't visiting the airport, they're visiting the destination. So if you were to go to your stakeholders and say, look, we've got this 90 euros, help us to be competitive, you're going to have to find some money from the public sector, the private sector, and you're going to have to try and help us offset this and soften the blow. What do you think the reaction would be? And is that a conversation that you would be willing to have, that you are having, that you're considering? How are you planning on dealing with something like this?
the problem is quite serious for airlines and the passengers, and of course for us. And Andreas summarized very good the impact. So it is not only the airline and the airport, but at the end, it will be all European cities and the airports having this problem, because they will stay at the end less in the hotels, because they will be spending most of their money to the airline ticket. They will consume less in the city, and overall, all tourism will be affected. So I'm sure everyone would like to change this and they have a contribution on this, but ability of local governments, local authorities, private investors, or hoteliers to support financially to this can be a good hope, but cannot be so much realistic, and we cannot confront with this, I believe. Of course, we have to work all together to protect the brand name of the product. In our case, it is Crete and Heraklion. Yes, we have to work together with the perfect passenger experience, service quality, and so on. But if we talk about this financial thing, let me to give example from, in my previous speech, I talked about the airport fee. If I give specifically example from this, airport fee composed of many cost items, and airport itself cannot observe this alone, neither none of the stakeholders. It can be only from government level, like removing of airport development fees, some concessions to concession fees to the airlines, or some other alternatives. And we don't have so much space. I mean, what if, let's say, there will be another regulation, another tax, another crisis comes, so we won't have too much space to observe more. This is why I believe at the end, solution has to be in the EU level or governmental level. I think the first step might be delaying the implementation or revising time schedule in a way local governments to create their strategy, their agenda, how to work with all stakeholders, how to find remedies to support airlines and all parties, how to observe this delay as a team. This is what I can say, because...
Absolutely. I think two things. One is sensitization, which is what we're doing here. Make people aware of what's happening and don't just assume that, oh, this affects the airlines and the airports, we're not going to be affected. There's a massive trickle-down effect. But the second thing is you've got to get ahead of it, because obviously if people start realizing when the hotels are empty, it's too late. You've got to try and mitigate that. So I know we've sort of run out of time, but we are the last session, so we're going to take a few liberties. And I want to come to you, Vasiliki, on this. And just say, how are you going to prepare for a tax like this? And more importantly, do you have assurances that this money raised will be invested in creating more SAF availability, or invested into aviation? Or is it going to go into a central EU pot and spent on something completely different? Because surely that's an issue.
This is absolutely essential. So the aviation industry is trying to protect itself. Okay? We are not asking for any support. Time's up, as it says here. Time's up. Time's up for aviation, guys. It's going to be becoming green. It's going to become sustainable. Companies are going to be pushed to invest in new aircrafts, and taxes are going to be there because we need to emit less. Aviation is fast-forwarding for the maritime industry. The ferry industry is coming up, is following us. The trains are not lagging behind, because if you try to move all the traffic from the air to the trains, they are over capacity and they cannot do it. So what the aviation ecosystem is asking, with one voice, for the first time ever, we are paying, we will be paying. We are not delaying the project of sustainability and greening aviation anymore. What we want is to be granted the right, which we are not granted up to now. The trialogue maybe will give that outcome, because that was the end of how the first reading ended up in the European Parliament, to access a portion of that money that is put into the pot of the European Commission, Union, budget, to fund alternative manufacturing means, plus to fund the production of SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, that we are obliged to purchase at 2% in 2025, is not available. In Greece, it will not be available in any of the airports other than Athens for 10 to 15 years. So we are obliged to buy 2% in 2025, 37%, I think I have the numbers, I always get them mixed up, by 2030, and 85% by 2040. And in none of the Greek airports will SAF be available at any time until 2040. So this means that we will be purchasing this fuel without actually uplifting it in our aircraft. So what do we need? We need to have the available fuel. The sustainable fuel needs to be available in as many airports as fast as it can. So what the aviation industry is asking, give the incentives and give an obligation to member states to make a minimum available everywhere in the EU. Otherwise, you will have a greenwashing effect, which we don't want. Now, if you put to the slide, the other one that I showed you, what we do is try to be as efficient as we can. As an airline, we monitor the function of each engine, of each aircraft. This is what the new generation engines do for your aircrafts. We monitor the fuel burn. We monitor the pilots to see how much fuel they burn, what is the angle of ascent when they take off, what is the angle of descent when they land, what is their cruising height, what is their speed at cruising level, because this is how we manage to save fuel, which means to save CO2 emissions. And we monitor that on the ground. So we say, don't use the APU of the aircraft because it's burning fuel. Don't use a GPU that is green, that is available on the apron on the airport. Don't use it on taxi, just use one engine, or use an electric pushback to take you there. These are things that made it possible for Sky Express, because this is a competitive world. The other airlines have a better ability to sell cheaper tickets. So we managed to reduce by half our emissions, even though we grew from 2020 to 2021, which is a trend that is following from 2022, that we had 1.2 million passengers in 21 and 3.3 million in 22. The trend is limiting our CO2 emissions by 30% following each and every mile and each and every minute of each and every engine of each and every aircraft. This is the way that you do it. This is the way the industry will try to contain the cost as much as it can, but it cannot be absorbed. It will be left to the consumers to pay at the end, and it will make it expensive.
I think what you're saying is you're doing the things that are there in front of us now that you can do, invest in new technology, and put it front and center of your business strategy and your culture, that the pilots are thinking about this and you're monitoring it and they know that, and everybody's doing what they can. But ultimately, we are beholden to the fact that there isn't the supply of SAF, and even if there is, it's 5 times the cost.
Exactly.
And that, again, has to be passed on. It cannot be absorbed by the airlines. We cannot stress that enough. The airlines can't afford to offset these costs. It will have to go onto your ticket, which puts up the price in a high inflationary, difficult environment. So we don't want to finish on a downer, but
this is an up one.
This is an up one. This is good.
There is way.
But at the same time, it's about sensitization. That's why I was saying at the beginning, it's great to be here with an audience of people investing in tourism and hospitality, because these things are going to affect us all, whether we like it or not. And if we don't get ahead of it, it's going to be too late. So with that, I think I've got a question, but I don't know whether we're allowed that. Ali's in charge. So I'd like to thank our panelists.
Have a mic?
Please, yeah, go. Is it working, Ali?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. One thing, I'm ahead of this topic for the last 9 or 10 months. I'm from Bulgaria. We got contacted by Lufthansa in general, which raised the problem. We were not aware as well.
This is their.
I know. It came from the person that I gave the contact. More or less, there are a couple of things. So first of all, unfortunately, majority of the business is still not aware that such a big thing is happening. Second of all, unfortunately, to some countries, especially Greece, Bulgaria, Portugal, all of the islands in the Mediterranean. I don't know how Cyprus or Malta are going to deal with it. I don't know, maybe some new railroad is going there. But anyhow, this is huge. So this will make travel much more expensive and much more difficult. We listened today that in Europe there it's around 800 to 900 million euros, almost 1 trillion, 800 billion euros revenue made by tourism, and about 10% of the population that works in the hospitality and the whole sphere. So this is putting all of these things in risk, and it's starting as of 2024. Unfortunately, majority of the countries are still not aware of that it's coming. Unfortunately, it was funny for me to understand that a major part of the ports were not aware of it 5 to 6 months ago. And it was voted, I think, in August this year.
It's not voted. The first reading finished.
Yeah, because it had to be in
so
August.
So it's now in the dialogue open for everyone to participate.
Yeah. In general, what we did through our Ministry of Tourism and Ministry of Transportation, we raised it in a couple of European events. In France, in one of the events, the Green parties left the discussion after our Minister of Tourism raised the question. So in general, whatever the industry does, in 2 years nothing will change. So the only way this could happen is if there is some partnership between the countries that will take the burden of this change. If there is a veto on this regulation, delay for sure, and then follow up by a change into this one. This is the only way, because as of 2 years, so now it's 2022, end of 2022, we have, 2 years. Are you going to survive it? Most probably, majority of the airplane companies will not survive it. You're going to buy some new planes, you're going to restrict, you're going to try to steal some of the market share from the others, what you mentioned. But
and try to compete. This is a competitive market.
Yeah, but you're not going to compete only with your fellow airplane companies. You're going to compete with other destinations. How are you going to compete with Turkish Airways?
If you want to be global, think local. We need to invest in our destination and be sure that this is a destination that people will want to come. If people want to come, they will fly. If they fly, we will put them into the aircraft. We will bring them into the airport. We will put them at the doorstep of the hotel. This is an ecosystem, as you heard before. It is an ecosystem. We will not do it alone. But time's up. Time's up. Even the traditional airlines will limit their flights because they will not have the benefit of their free allowances. They will pay for their CO2. Even if nothing else happens, at the end of the free rides is going to change the game. What we want is a new airline that we went into a competitive market, we didn't go into a protected market, is to have a level playing field when this happens. So if it's going to be 0, let it be 0 for everyone. If it's going to be 100, let it be 100 for everyone. Otherwise, you cannot compete.
Absolutely.
And the other thing, just to be not to take it really hard, I read today that China has started to produce fastly biofuels now, and they are not producing them for themselves most probably, so they will cover the issue that Europe has now.
We need to ask the airport if they will have SAF uptake.
Absolutely.
In their blend.
So I think we can continue the conversation on the bus to the reception, can't we, Ellie? I think we want to wrap up there, but big round of applause for my wonderful panel. Thanks for your engagement.
Thank you.